The Browns are set to have one of the most consequential off seasons in franchise history. After going 11-5, they do have some room with some cap space and some draft assets to make some really fine adjustments with a margin of error that is small. Off seasons like the one the Browns are about to enter are where GMs make their money, right? It's where you can make the right handful of decisions that gets your team to the promised land, so to speak, or it's where you make the wrong, 5 or 4 decisions in free agency, the too long extensions, the bad deals that really ruin a team from the inside out, right? It's the difference from being the Chiefs, from being one of the top teams in the NFL, to being the Texans or the Jaguars, a team that was contending just a few years ago, but now is in shambles. So given the importance of this offseason, what should the Browns look for and what things should they change? Well, let's talk about it. Before I get into this video, I want to make sure that you're subscribed, hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on anything. We're going to have a full slate for the all season. I'm super excited about it. Also, want to give a shout out to the patreon.com dog check tier members, and as always, they start with Michael Matique, Rob Farron, Kyle Stouffer, Lukey from Munich, David Roth, J Guy 101, Musty Taco, Joe Bobby, Keith Gerkak, Brad Calbo, Daylon W, James McGinty, Arenda Hall, Rex Kaufman, Chad Gimme, David Molinado, Andrew Sadejo, Dylan Hill, Josh Bendor, Eric Green, Jaleel Salim Jr., Martha Krusna, Mark M, TJ Showman, Stuart Moore, Bobo Regretti, Anthony O, David Arndt, Robert Jermaine Jr., Dave Mike May, John Cummings, Andrew Hirsch, Hundo McNifico, Curtis Bayer, Batman, Rush Sharir, Barack Kumar, John Alver, Beerman 069, Masayua, Buds of Roland, James Nemo, Mac House, Reeve Hertz, Philip Wilcoxon, Marie Viver, CK, Keith Anderson, Sean Barron, Gagos Pisano, Dom Guzzulo, Nick Nasty, Ian Whitaker, Colin 216, Anthony Latham, Christian, Matt Bond, Dave Strong, Michael Stone, Soul Train, Charles Work, Billy, Michael Holden, Acton, Moose Gentry, Patrick F, Austin Z, Mark Burnett II, Andre Griffin, Otis Wolf, IT Rex, Greg Ehlers, Austin Bolin, Jesus Serrano, Chris Fones, Picktown Brown Backers, Mark Kahn, Max Out Dojo, and Water Bear Marketing. Again, guys, thank you so much for either subscribing or joining the Patreon. Both are really helpful. Again, these are things that really are instrumental to this channel's growth. Now, let's talk about the growth of the Cleveland Browns. The season the Browns just left, right? The 2020 season was a season that was full of just a ton of questions, right? Questions that you thought you quasi-answered in 2018 that got muddied up in 2019 because of the whole Freddie Kitchens experiment, right? The questions like, is Baker Mayfield a franchise quarterback? Do you have a good head coach at the helm? And can the Haslams not get in their own way as much as they have in recent history, right? These are the 3 things they needed to answer during the season. They got great answers on that. Kevin Stefanski won Coach of the Year. Baker Mayfield threw for over 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, only like 8 interceptions. So, yeah, you found out about him. And the Haslams, no headlines about the Haslams all year. So you got to give them credit where credit is due. So now that those questions are answered about this team, the decision-making process changes in a very different way than it's looked like ever in the expansion era for the Cleveland Browns, right? Since its inception, since the Browns have come back in '99, the smart play for this franchise has always been to prioritize youth and upside over known quantities. There wasn't much reason to bring in veterans, right? When the Browns were doing it, it didn't make any sense, right? It didn't make any sense to bring in Willie McGinnis or Jamie Collins or these guys at the end of their careers that were here to help the Browns at the end of it. But now the Browns are in a position of where they have a ton of youth and upside already on the roster that there's really not a ton of room to fit more people. Like maybe on the defensive side of the ball, you have some room there, but you have to think you're already filling a space for Grant Delpit. You're already filling a youth space for Ronnie Harrison and Greedy Williams and all these other young guys. You want to work Jordan Elliott, all these other young guys across the defense that you want to work in. So even on the side of the ball where there's a lot of question marks, there's not a lot of room for youth and growth, right? If you want to fix the defense, you're not going to fix it in the draft this year or with youth and growth. It's going to take some veteran players to come in and step up. And that just changes the thinking for this Browns offseason more than any other Browns offseason. Also consider, and I know this sounds weird for Browns fans, but this is true. These next two seasons for the Cleveland Browns, 2021 and 2022, that's the Super Bowl window. And I say that because that's when they have all of the following guys under contract or control for these next 2 years, right? You got Odell, you got Jarvis, you got Miles, you got Nick Chubb, you got Baker Mayfield, you got J.C. Treader, you got Joe Bitonio, Kareem Hunt, Jack Conklin, and Jedrick Wills. That is almost the entire core of your team locked up for the next 2 years plus space. So that is the window for this Cleveland Browns team. Make no mistakes about it. That is it. You might have some guys who are going to be big additions or losses after the 2021 season, like Wyatt Teller and Ronnie Harrison, but you still have space so you can keep them. So even those guys are guys who can be a part of the core for at least the next 2 years. So I think it's important to understand that this offseason isn't about getting to being a contender. It's about fine-tuning your contendership and adding to the core that you have. Because if you heard that core, that's a massive and very impressive core that the Cleveland Browns have. So with that being considered, all three phases of the offseason will be interesting. And we're going to start by talking about phase one. So this offseason, retaining is not going to be a big storyline. Yeah, you got guys like Baker and Denzel who are up for their fifth-year option, but given that they just gave David Njoku a fifth-year option, it's kind of a prove it. They're definitely going to give those two a fifth-year option. So yeah, this offseason, not going to be the biggest deal with the retaining part. They can retain most of these guys and it not be a problem. Spoiler warning, 2022 though, it's going to be all about retaining. The whole offseason will happen before March starts for the Cleveland Browns because they're going to just be retaining everybody or trying to retain everybody. But this year, not the case. You got guys like Larry Ogunjobi and Olivier Vernon, who, if you read the tea leaves, looks like they're going to be gone. Olivier Vernon, because he tore his Achilles, so unless he wants to stay on like a vet minimum, he's not going to be on the team next year. And Larry Ogunjobi, it just doesn't seem like it's fitting with this team, right? He doesn't seem like the fit they want. They seem like they want to go in a different direction with the interior defensive line. And for Larry Ogunjobi, I don't think he's a great fit in this Cleveland Browns defensive system. I think he'll find better success somewhere else, hopefully outside the division, because places like Baltimore could use a dude like Larry Ogunjobi. But he doesn't really have a great fit here, seeing that he has the struggles and the rundowns, and they ask him to be a 3-down defensive tackle. Some interesting guys are going to be up. Rashard Higgins, who you can retain pretty cheaply. Malcolm Smith, who you can retain pretty cheaply. Carl Joseph, who you can retain pretty cheaply. Andrew Sedale, who you can retain pretty cheaply. B.J. Goodson, who they can all be brought back at the right price is what I'm saying here, right? Because one, market's not going to be as robust, so it's not like there's going to be a ton of dudes driving up the market for a guy like Rashard Higgins or Carl Joseph or Malcolm Smith. It's just not going to happen with all the cap crunches that are going to happen because the cap is going down this year. So retaining is not going to be a big deal. You can get these guys at the same money or even less money than you had them already, even though some of these guys were incredibly cheap already. So the retaining part, that's not going to be a big deal right there. Like, you want to keep some guys, but it's not going to be a big moneymaker. This next part is going to be the most important part. Okay, so when we talk about free agency in 2021, there are some realities that I don't think have set in with the people who talk about the NFL yet. One of those realities is that the cap's going down. Like $20 million down, right? It looks like the cap's going to be at about $181 million. Maybe they tip it to $185, which will make a difference for some teams that are close to that number. But for everybody else, that they're going to be in cap punishment territory, right? There's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be in cap trouble once that cap cuts. Also, there are going to be some notable trades instead of signing. There are going to be a ton of trades. It's already been a ton of trades. It's going to be a very chaotic offseason. First reason, as I mentioned earlier, there are some teams that, there's being over the cap and there's being what these teams are. You got the Saints, who are $74 million over the cap. The Eagles, who are $49 million over the cap. The Steelers are $30 million over the cap. And the Steelers, as bad as their situation is, they have a reasonable path to fix it, right? So they're not in as much trouble as like the Eagles or the Saints or the Rams are, because they can just restructure Ben's deal and then cut Joe Hayden, and then maybe you make a couple other cap pieces and you can't re-sign anybody, but you'll be fine, right? So that is what the situation is for a lot of teams. I think over half the NFL is going to be over the cap once they cut it. They're going to be contending teams, right? Like the Chiefs, the Titans, the Bills, who are going to have to make some cuts if they want to bring in anybody. There's just going to be a lot of chaos on that front, like the Texans, right? What are they going to do cap-wise if they do decide to trade Deshaun Watson? If they trade him, there's no reason to keep J.J. Watt. There's no reason to have that high of a cap. Obviously, the goal is to build assets for the future. So you would then dump a ton of these guys who's going to make J.J. Watt available, going to make a ton of dudes on that defense and offense available. So there's going to be a lot of interesting situations. I don't even think we're close to even knowing what the landscape of free agency is going to look like because of all those changes. And what do these changes mean for free agency traditionally? Well, it's going to be a lot of dudes not happy with their offer sheets, right? There are going to be a lot of older players, probably 31, 32, who are going to be very unhappy with what the market is offering them. It's going to be a lot more Jadeveon Clowney situations is what I'm saying. Think of this offseason in this free agency as the inverse of the 2016 NBA offseason, right? You guys remember that where like random dudes in the NBA were getting like huge money deals. For the NFL, this is going to be the inverse. You're going to see some guys, big names, signing places on cheap 1 or 2 year deals, hoping that they can just egg it out until the cap raises back to where it normally is in a couple of years. That's the situation for the NFL. That's the situation for a lot of veteran players. That might even be the situation for a lot of younger players who aren't going to get the paydays that they want. And instead of getting somewhere long-term and settling for a lesser payday, they might take a smaller payday for a couple of years so they can be available when that cap does spike up. So that's going to change a lot of things. Another thing that's going to change a lot of things is that not a lot of teams are going to be shopping for free agents. It's going to be a less robust market. And a less robust market means cheaper, good players for those who have space, which is going to lead to, again, a ton of veteran players signing on short deals, which is great news for the Cleveland Browns. Because this offseason, the Browns normally look at guys who are like 24 to 26 to bring in, right? Because you're prioritizing upside. This offseason, they don't need to look at those guys. Like if they come available and they're cheap, yeah, sign them, of course. Right? If you want Marcus May, get them. But the Browns need to look at these 28 to 33-year-olds, these veteran players, the Ravens free agents, as I like to call them, right? How the Ravens always get those veteran players at the end of their career that they squeeze a little juice out of. It's time for the Browns to do the same thing, right? They need to look at these guys who are going to become cap casualties or a casualty of the cap situation in 2021. Richard Sherman is a veteran who can likely become somebody who has to sign for less money than he expected and does look like he wants to play in Cleveland. There's going to be a ton of veterans on the defensive side of the ball that will become cap casualties. Joe Hayden's an interesting one. J.J. Watt, Malik Jackson, Quan Alexander, Geno Atkins, Carlos Dunlap, Jarrell Casey. The help on the defensive line will be there after all of these dudes get cut around March, right? They're going to get cut. And for this year, Browns fans, free agency isn't really going to be about day one of free agency stuff. Like, it would be great to get Leonard Williams. You're probably not going to get Leonard Williams, right? He's going to be really expensive because he's young, he has youth. He's going to be a cornerstone piece for somebody's defense. Probably not going to be able to get your hands on Leonard Williams. But Malik Jackson on his fourth team, you might be able to get that. J.J. Watt, you might be able to get that if he gets cut. You could restructure not even restructure, but sign him to a cheaper deal than what he's on, because right now he's a $17 million cap hit. Geno Atkins, squeeze a little juice out of that. Carlos Dunlap definitely has some juice in Seattle. Maybe they cut him for cap reasons. You can bring him in. Jarrell Casey would be a nice inside piece. Like, the help will be there for the Cleveland Browns. It's all about pouncing on those opportunities. They did not do that last year, and they didn't do it because they were in a different place in this rebuild last year than they've ever been, right? They didn't jump on the guys like Mike Daniels. They didn't jump on the older veterans that I thought they should have jumped on to make that leap. Now they're in that position, definitely. Day one of free agency, going to be pretty boring for Browns fans, probably. But day 2, 3, 4, in the end of March, that's where the Browns are going to make a ton of key decisions. So if you're a Browns fan, Keep your eyes out for that kind of adjustment, because I know we're going to be all excited about the first day of free agency, but I just don't think that's where the Browns are going to spend a lot of money. I think it's going to be in the veteran late March market to even like early July. You know what I mean? Like before camp. This is where the Browns are going to work. And that's how they have to work given what their situation is, where they have some cap space but not a ton, but they also just need to make some fine adjustments. All right, and then for the draft, my biggest philosophy for this team is, I know people are going to talk about need. I know they're going to talk about what the Browns need to do in the draft. Throw that all out. Best player available. You're in that situation, right, where you just get the best player available. Because let's be honest here, right? You might need a defensive tackle, but the defensive tackle you get in this draft, he's probably not even going to play. Because that's where the Browns are, and if he is playing, something horrible went wrong, right? With the rookies this year, if they were playing, something bad went wrong. Either you were disappointed with David Njoku's camp performance, or you were disappointed, or Dodell gets hurt and you lose a bunch of wide receivers, or something goes down to where you need those rookies. But even they don't pop up in the areas where you needed needs last season, right? Wide receiver wasn't one of those areas where you needed needs. Tight end wasn't one of those areas where you had a need. It's where you went best player available. And that is exactly what the Browns need to do. I get Browns fans are going to want to do need and get linebackers. They're going to mock all these DBs in here. The truth is, this draft kind of stinks defensively. And if they do get anybody defensively, it's going to be like in the 4th or 5th round, because this draft just doesn't have a lot of top-tier defenders. So what they're going to have to do is just go best player available. They might draft the running back. They might draft the wide receiver. They might draft the offensive lineman. Like, they're going to draft pieces that they just think are the best player available, because more than likely, the only players who are going to be able to play are the ones who are the best players available on a team that's going to be, hopefully, as good as the Cleveland Browns is. So I get the Browns have a safety need. In the first round, I would say no, best player available, because there's no safety other than like Surtain, who's not really a safety, that's really going to help you this year, right? Defensive line, unless you get Barrymore, there's really nobody's going to help you at the end of the first round. You just need to go best player available or trade back for a bunch of assets. And even then, what you need all these assets for unless you're trying to trade for somebody. So need in the draft. In the draft, it's going to take a major backseat to best player available. Need's going to get filled in free agency, not in the draft. So that's another adjustment the Browns are going to have to make, because we're used to addressing a ton of needs in the draft. This year, needs not going to be addressed in the draft. It's going to look random. There's going to be some draft picks. You're like, why would the Browns do this? It doesn't make any sense. It's because they went best player available. That's what they have to do. At this point, you're just going best player available. It's going to be much different than what we're used to. But in conclusion, that is what this offseason is going to be. It's going to be much different. It's going to be an inverse. Normally, we're super excited for the start of the offseason, have all this optimism for the offseason, and then we lose it in fall. Now the excitement's for fall, and we'll just be kind of mad during free agency, right? We're going to talk about how they can fix things and how they can bring things in, and they're going to be important things that they do in free agency, but they're not going to bring in a ton of huge, big ticket items. They're going to bring in veterans from other teams. While that might not be exciting on the surface, these are the moves that you make that help you win Super Bowls, right? That puts you over the top. Signing, if you're in a position to give a ton of money to a bunch of dudes in free agency this year, odds are you probably weren't going to be going over the top anytime soon. The things you need to do, the teams that go over the top are the teams that are in the position the Browns are in. So this is going to be a pivotal offseason for Andrew Berry. I'm excited to see what he does here. Kevin Stefanski last year got to prove his metals in the crazy season that the Browns had and how well he did. Now it's Andrew Berry's turn. Let's see how good Andrew Berry is, given all the adversity and circumstance he's going to have to wade through to have a good offseason this year. Let's see what he does. And that's what I'm excited to see. But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.